So you may have noticed already, but physical media is cool again. Books, DVDs, CDs, vinyls are all slowly creeping back into society, unearthed from the cultural entrails of the past. Now granted, some of it might be nostalgia, but I think it's more likely springing out from a new wave of anti-establishment fervor that has arisen of late in relation to the scarcity of physical ownership. Why, you may indeed ask? Well, because we just don't own things like we used to. Physical possession has been swapped out for convenient online accessibility. Instead of having hordes of DVDs in the cupboard, you can just go to Netflix or Amazon Prime and watch whatever is available with just the click of a button. Instead of having mountains of books on your shelves, you can just read any book you want or wherever you want by just downloading an ebook or by just getting a Kindle. But wait, why is this an issue? Surely this level of convenience is a good thing. Well, yeah, the convenience is nice, but the issue is that you just don't own anything. You see, in the past, when you bought a DVD or a newly released album and you paid for it, it was yours. Now, I know that might be a foreign concept to a lot of people now, but seriously, once you paid for something, there weren't a lot of ways to be suddenly dispossessed of that thing that you purchased. And that's where the point of contention begins to arise. You might have, for instance, seen the recent controversy of Amazon and Kindle. On February 26th of this year, Amazon removed the ability to download and transfer Kindle books to computers via USB as a backup, a feature that had been available for well over a decade. Meaning that Amazon now has full control over your access to books. And if for whatever reason they decided to remove some of your books from the platform or inexplicably suspend your account, well,
you can kiss them goodbye.
So what, you pay your hard-earned money for it? Get a load of this guy. And the funny thing is, this is not a hypothetical, because in 2009, this exact situation played out when Amazon removed George Orwell's 1984 from Kindle because they just didn't have the rights to sell the book in the first place. And for the people who had already purchased the book, Amazon just didn't do anything about it. You know, a book they paid for essentially just vanished into thin air. This whole thing is causing a massive fuss and riling up the entire community, and it's for obvious reason. Our digital ownership is proving more and more useless by the day. Our purchasing power has been reduced to a rental license more than anything. We pay a fee to have access to a video game or pay to have access to movies or music, but none of it belongs to us at all. You might, for instance, have a digital library with hundreds of video games, books, or movies downloaded, but it doesn't really belong to you, and especially not in the same way as if you actually had the physical versions themselves. Now, this transition is not just a change in the landscape of ownership, but a microcosm of a more fundamental structural shift in the layout of the different stratas of the economy. On the ground level, we still see the itinerary of capitalism, its traditional makeup of free markets, private ownership, and wage labor. But as the lines blur between world and digital economy, we begin to see in resurrection the long-lost internal logics of feudalism on a global scale, or what Greek economist Yanis Varoufakis describes as technofeudalism. Technofeudalism is the theory that we are slowly moving away from classical capitalism and into a new kind of economic system where tech giants effectively control the access to data and resources, akin to the feudal lords of medieval times who had a monopoly over the land and resources, and who leverage control to tie peasants to the land and extract labor value from them, making us, in this context, like modern-day serfs. When getting into the nitty-gritty details of it, Yanis Varoufakis states, "Profit drives capitalism. Rent drove feudalism. Now we have moved from one system to the other because of this new form of super-duper, all-singing, all-dancing capital, cloud capital, algorithmic capital. And if I'm right, that is creating new digital fiefdoms like Amazon.com, like Airbnb, where the main mode of wealth extraction comes in the form not of profit, but of rent. Take the Apple Store. You are producing an app. Apple can withhold 30% of your profits through a commission fee. That's a rent. That's like a ground rent. It's a bit like the Apple Store is a fiefdom. It's a cloud fiefdom, and Apple extracts a rent exactly as in feudalism. So my argument is not that we went back from capitalism to feudalism. My argument is that we have progressed forward to a new system, which has many of the characteristics of feudalism, but it is one step ahead of capitalism. To signal that, I added the word techno. So companies like Meta, Google, Amazon have an unrestricted hold of the infrastructure of the digital world, just like feudal lords own the land and also function as the gatekeepers of online culture and industry, selling us access through subscription models. Because these companies have such a monopolistic influence over the digital landscape, what we have in our midst is an oligarchy of tech billionaires through whom entire online ecosystems are captured and exploited. Big tech companies charge rent to sellers for access to their digital platforms, the land, like Amazon, the lords, in order to conduct their business operations, and then the rest of us, the serfs, end up reinforcing these very systems with our participation in them, leading to a new form of centralized economic control where the powers that be are able, by their own design, to artificially maintain power. We generate value for these companies through our engagement with their digital platforms and algorithms through the extraction of our data that then trains these algorithms to then further enmesh the user in the vortex of the digital space. We thus take up the mantle of a de facto labor force driving entire digital economies without any sort of payment or reward, despite the fact that they derive their efficiencies from the user data they collect. Trust me, I would know. And that is a helpful segue to introduce you to the sponsor of today's video. Nobody. Do you really think I would be sitting on the floor recording this video if I was getting sponsorship money? No. But hey, maybe once that YouTube money kicks in, I can buy myself a chair. Now, this particular matter was also explored by Jaron Lanier, a computer scientist and computer philosophy writer who uses the analogy of Maxwell's demon, a thought experiment first put forth in physics by James Clerk Maxwell in the 19th century. To quickly explain this analogy, the idea was to imagine a small but intelligent being known as a demon that would organize fast-moving and slow-moving molecules into separate chambers, thus creating order and seemingly violating the second law of thermodynamics, which states that entropy or disorder always increases in a closed system. It was eventually rejected as the demon itself would have needed energy to distinguish the molecules, no longer upheaving the law of entropy. So Jaron Lanier applies this analogy to the web economy, where big tech companies present their services as being free, when in reality it is the undocumented funding of user data treated like products and sold to advertisers that sustains itself through targeted ads, predictions, and profits in a way to manufacture and exploit your desires for, you guessed it, more money. Just more money. This commodification of user data isn't anything particularly new, but the ways in which it manifests changes. In the age of surveillance capitalism, Harvard professor Shoshana Zuboff echoes the woes of this kind of data extraction, attributing it to what she would term surveillance capitalism, and what she describes as the unilateral claiming of private human experience as free raw material for translation into behavioral data. Now, the interesting part here specifically for me is her description of behavioral commodification. As mentioned earlier, big tech corporations extract data from user behavior and then use this collected data to form predictive models to shape future behavior. So every time you scroll past something online, click a link, search something up, you are unconsciously training the algorithm and producing what Zuboff refers to as behavioral surplus. Information that isn't essential, but useful in tracking your future engagement. It is a way of forecasting your future behavior and by doing so, extracting the most data possible from you. Because if you're not paying for the product, then, spoiler alert, you might just be the product. They try to satisfy your desires while also shaping them in such a way that produces the most return on investment and aligning it with commercial objectives. So as economic control becomes more digitally centralized, we open up a new frontier of capitalism where the productive forces are no longer just the relics of industrial production and physical labor, but something much more invasive, the entire bandwidth of our online activity. You see, physical media means not just possession, but also ownership. But when streaming services entered the fray, the paradigm shifted to access-based consumption. This gets us onto cognitive capitalism, a concept outlined by Italian economist and political theorist Carlo Vercellone, which details a version of capitalism where the generation of economic value is no longer sourced through the typical modes of production, but through the concentrated exploitation of mental labor, of our knowledge, communication, creativity, and effect. According to Vercellone, between the 16th and 18th centuries, we experienced mercantile capitalism, then the boom of industrial capitalism between the 19th and 20th centuries, and now in the 21st century, we find ourselves in the era of cognitive capitalism. Workers used to be on the assembly lines. Now, they're in front of screens, and most of the work they do is immaterial. Whether through designs, content writing, or creation, our online activity generates value for these companies akin to immaterial labor. He also mingles this with his concept of the general intellect, which has its roots in Marx's theory, whereby knowledge and innovation are collectively produced, where society is organized into a joint productive force. In a section called Fragments on Machines from his work Grundrisse, Marx writes, general intellect has developed to a point where the general powers of the human head, science, and social knowledge become a direct force of production. The general intellect, in one sentence, is collective social knowledge that is produced across generations in any domain. So think of science, technology, language, maths, that over time becomes implanted in machines and institutions that then become a productive force that then contributes directly to economic value. One of the dangers here is that our knowledge gets exported to databases, algorithms, infrastructures that are under a company's monopoly, which then leads to the privatization of knowledge that was publicly sourced, which is essentially a money-making model of immortality. Because as long as knowledge is being collectively and socially produced and then privatized by companies, then profits are essentially limitless. The contrast between this and, let's say, a library is that a library is publicly funded and democratically owned. The knowledge it houses is publicly accessible and not privatized.
There is no nobility in poverty.
Libraries also don't track what you read and suggest what you should read next based off of your past record of reading. Libraries don't hijack nor facilitate your decision-making process, whereas tech platforms profit from the general intellect by optimizing for engagement and by accounting for your desires and habits through echo chambers, predictive models, and targeted advertising. It is a dichotomy of neutrality versus predation. Because once infrastructures are buttressed by the general intellect and are then continuously allocated user data, they no longer simply reflect stored knowledge, but interact with and manipulate it in a dynamic manner. That's where we get language learning models, AI image generators, outsourcing human agency and collective social knowledge. The attention economy has shifted from the Enlightenment ideals of public reason to technocratic, feudalistic, cognitivist surveillance, capitalism. Now, I agree with what some of Yanis Varoufakis has to say about capitalism, but would diagnose what he terms technofeudalism just a bit differently. In other words, what he describes as technofeudalism, I think, is more so an evolved version of capitalism. I don't think we've moved away outright from classical capitalism, but into a more kind of advanced, evolved capitalism. One that includes all the infrastructural branches of an ever-evolving capitalism, as opposed to a more advanced kind of feudalism. But that's besides the point, because it's what's being described here that I think is of importance. Amazon controls book distribution, Spotify, the music industry, Netflix and Disney, film and TV. As physical media becomes more obsolete, consumers begin to lose their autonomy and start to depend on these digital platforms for access to media and culture. Everything goes from a one-time purchase model to a subscription-based model, where media is sold to the public as a service, not as something that we can definitively own outright. And it's through this model that these companies can retain their leverage and continuously milk their consumers for more and more money, with paywall after paywall, until your Netflix subscription costs more than your rent. This is where we begin to see the revival of physical media, our own personal collections and libraries. And this is just one of the ways people are trying to fight back against digital centralization. Because instead of going to Netflix to watch your favorite movie, in lower quality, that's number one, but then to only realize that it's just not on Netflix actually, you can just go to your shelf, pick out a nice DVD, maybe a Blu-ray. They're obviously a Blu-ray, but maybe a Criterion, maybe you got money like that, I don't know. If your pockets are deep, get a Criterion. But that's why companies like Criterion are so important, because they preserve and restore films that would otherwise be lost to time, who also refuse to let streamers dictate film availability and importance. So if you're a film buff like myself, how about buying some actual movies? Cancel that Disney Plus subscription, man. Cancel it. I'm waiting. Or if you're into literature, like myself as well, go and buy actual physical books. Now, I know they can be pricey, and often I opt for ebooks and digital books just because it's way cheaper. I mean, half the non-fiction books I read, for instance, are all free, available online. But if I actually want to go and buy a real philosophy book, for instance, yeah, a little bit expensive. But again, it doesn't have to be from a massive retail chain. Just go and buy some books from a local secondhand bookstore. Go ahead and buy some books from there. Go and support them. Because at the end of the day, your secondhand bookstores are not draining your pockets of money, because they don't make that much money to begin with. In the land of corporate greed, they are a safe haven for good and affordable books, because they aren't obsessed with pure profit. And oftentimes, physical media, owning real physical copies, even of video games or books or movies, can be seen as a bit of a privilege. And I get that. Digital media isn't all bad, but under the current economic order, it just means that you don't have that much control over it. Which is why, as consumers, I think it is very important that we offer a bit of resistance. And one of the ways we can exert that resistance is through physical media. Now look, if you didn't know already, I'm South African. So maybe on the surface it seems a bit weird what a South African has to say about technofeudalism, cognitive capitalism. But unlike old industrial capitalism, capitalism in the modern age is borderless. Think of your companies like Google and Amazon. They aren't big just in the US, not even the UK, not even in the entire West. It's global. Their influences are infrastructural. Because at the end of the day, we are all pawns in the larger scheme of things. And we can either accept and allow for power to funnel towards the top and amass unchecked, or we can try and reclaim some digital sovereignty by offering a bit of resistance through either vocal disapproval online, cancelling your subscriptions, or returning to physical media, which it seems a lot of people are doing. So at the end of the day, returning to physical media is not just about nostalgia. It signifies something much more significant, and that is resistance to monopoly, but also reclaiming, once again, our digital sovereignty. But anyways, that's the end of the video, and if you like these kinds of things, leave a like on the video, subscribe, and possibly check out my Patreon, link in the description. But anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.